Bob Casey is the Democratic candidate running for re-election to the U.S. Senate. Why are you running for re-election?
Well, Phil, great to be with you. Thanks for this opportunity. I'm running because there's a lot on the line in this election when it comes to, first of all, some basic rights, the rights of Americans to have a full and free right to vote is on the line, and democracy itself is on the line. We'll have a big debate about women's rights and workers' rights, and all of the important issues surrounding those rights. It's also an election where we've got to do everything we can to win the battle to lower costs. Families are facing higher costs today than maybe as high a set of costs as we've ever seen. Whether it's the cost of groceries at the grocery store, that's why I've been waging this fight on greedflation and shrinkflation, to point out those the corporate greed that's led to those higher costs. So I'm going to keep waging that battle. I voted proudly to lower the cost of insulin for Medicare Part D beneficiaries, to cap that at $35 a month. We should continue that fight to lower the cost of insulin and all prescription drugs for all Americans, in addition to seniors. And there's also a fight and a debate about how do we lower costs for families when they're raising their children. That's why I voted to support a much more generous child tax credit, so families can buy food for their children and pay for difficult onerous expenses like rent and their mortgage and so many other costs in the lives of families. So a lot of big debates, a lot of big fights about major issues, and I want to run for re-election to continue to fight for families in our state and to win battles for those families and win battles on these major issues that are confronting not only Pennsylvania but the American people.
Well, let's go back in time a little bit. Where did you grow up?
I grew up in Scranton, Pennsylvania, and still live there.
What was your childhood like?
Well, I was really blessed. I had two parents that raised 8 children, mostly all in the same house over the course of all those years. And I was really fortunate that both our parents were always there for us. We always knew that they loved us and that they were going to support us no matter what. And that sense of security is something that a lot of children, a lot of families don't have today. Both economic security as well as the security of knowing that you have that kind of support at home. But I grew up in Scranton, went to grade school and high school there, then went to Massachusetts for college, and then came back to Pennsylvania.
Did you have an interest in politics when you were a kid?
I did, mostly because my father was involved for most of my childhood and beyond. He was a state senator and then became Auditor General of the state. And when I was much younger, he was seeking the office of governor. He ran a few times before being elected when I was age 26. So that exposed me to politics and issues surrounding state government at the time. But it goes back pretty far. But I wouldn't have guessed when I was a teenager, even beyond that I'd be a candidate for public office. That came later.
You mentioned your father. What did you learn about politics from him?
I think the most important thing I learned was that as a public official, you've got to do everything you can to make sure that you commit yourself to public service. He used to make reference to, and I've made reference to, a precept. It just happens to be a version of it is inscribed in the Finance Building in Harrisburg. It's all public service is a trust given in faith and accepted in honor. And it's a great description of what public service is all about, that people give you power if you're elected in trust, and you accept that power as best you can as a public official by returning their faith in you by honoring the public trust. And I think his commitment to performing as a public official with integrity and with a commitment to the needs of the people, but also that you've got an obligation as a public official to do everything you can to lift up and support families that are struggling and to go to bat for them and to deliver for them. And so he was a I think for any public official, he was about as good an example as you could have in any state, and I just happened to have a front row seat watching all that.
Now, you mentioned you went to college after high school. What did you major in?
Majored in English.
What was interesting to you about that?
Mostly because it was, you exposed yourself to a lot of literature and poetry, and I think it gave you a sense of people's lives and their challenges and kind of the human condition. I probably should have memorized more poetry when I was that age, but just having an exposure to liberal arts and critical thinking and learning how to write is better than some might have without that kind of background. So I was really fortunate.
What did you do after college?
Right after college, I was in a volunteer program called the Jesuit Volunteer Corps. I had gone to a Jesuit high school in Scranton Prep, and then college at Holy Cross, which was also a Jesuit school. And the Jesuits were always advocating service, to dedicate some portion of your life to service. So I decided to be a volunteer for a year, and that meant that I wound up taking a job, and I was thrilled that they accepted me to be a teacher in North Philadelphia, a 5th grade teacher and an 8th grade basketball coach.
What do you learn about yourself as a young man doing something like that?
That was about as hard a job as I've ever had, because I wasn't really prepared to be a teacher. They needed someone to teach 5th grade, and when you're a volunteer, you come at a good price. So I learned, I guess, that I could take on a big, difficult challenge and succeed, and in that case, make it through a school year and be able to do everything I could, not just to teach these 5th graders whatever I could teach them about math or reading or science or whatever it was, but also that I could try my best to be an example for them at that age in their lives. And it gave me a chance at that moment when I was teaching in that classroom to try to understand what a lot of people are up against. These children I was teaching were from low-income neighborhoods that surrounded the school I taught in. And it gave me a sense of how difficult their lives were, that my life wasn't that difficult when I was their age or thereafter. And it gave me a renewed appreciation for what some people have to struggle with every day, depending upon the circumstances within which they live.
Now, you also went to law school. Was that part of the plan, or did you need to take some time to think about that?
Well, I actually had 2 years between college and law school. 1 year as a volunteer and the second year working in a law firm. And that gave me exposure to the work of lawyers and the work of a law firm. And so it gave me some foundation to be prepared to go to law school, but I'm not sure anything adequately prepares you for law school. It's an awful grind. But I guess in the back of my mind, when I was even when I was much younger, I thought that I would probably become a lawyer. I didn't expect to become a lawyer and then later a public official.
When did you decide to become a public official?
I announced for the office of Auditor General when I was 35 and was elected at 36.
Now, you served 2 terms in that position.
Right.
What was that experience like? It's a statewide office. It's your first time as an elected official.
It was challenging, and the good news is my father had done the job. He'd been elected twice in 1968 and 1972. So he had been there and really transformed the office from an office that people didn't hear much from to an office where the results of audits were being announced virtually every day of the week. That was transformative, and he actually professionalized the office. But I had a chance to be exposed to what that office could do, and by conducting audits and investigations, you could move the ball forward on changing policy and improving people's lives. But the challenge for me was to try to find a strong team that I could surround myself with to be able to run that office, and I did. I was really blessed to have a great team, and we had a very successful 8 years.
Now, you were elected to the U.S. Senate in 2006. What makes a good senator?
I'd add in between there, I was state treasurer before going to the U.S. Senate. I think it's a combination of delivering for the people that elect you, and I think I've done that as a United States Senator. Delivering for families, delivering for communities. I'll walk through some of those examples maybe. But I think it's a job where you have to have the interests of your state in mind every time you cast a vote, every time you make a decision. But you also have to keep in mind the needs of the nation and the security concerns of the nation, because you're elected not simply to represent a state on domestic issues, you're elected as well to represent the national interest when it comes to our security and issues that affect the whole nation. So it's a job that requires a deep commitment to the state from which you're elected.
How do you build relationships with your colleagues to build support for the policies that you're interested in?
Well, part of that is getting to know them as people. Elected officials in a legislative body have to work together to move legislation forward. In the Senate, nothing happens, or almost nothing happens, without bipartisan support. So part of that is getting to know people as individuals, getting to know their work and their priorities, and being able to somehow fuse together your interests in a bill or an issue with their interests. Now, those interests might be an interest that they have that's related to their state, their constituents, or it might be an interest they've had for years to move policy forward. And I've got a very strong record introducing and passing bipartisan legislation.
Now, you mentioned in the beginning one of the key issues that you're interested in is voting rights. What do you see the issues are for that topic right now?
Well, I think what we've seen over the last number of years are efforts to erect barriers to the right to vote, and that's why we should pass the John Lewis Voting Rights Act, which would knock down barriers to the right to vote and provide a much stronger Voting Rights Act. It used to be almost academic that Democrats and Republicans would come together to make sure that the Voting Rights Act of 1965 was strengthened and protected and maybe improved when it needed that. But that began to break down over the last number of years. So now when a Supreme Court decision begins to chip away at those rights and undermines the original intent of the Voting Rights Act, you have to pass legislation to provide a remedy for that. And unfortunately, we haven't had enough votes to pass the Voting Rights Act, which is we make reference to it as the John Lewis bill, who was a great civil rights leader who passed away a few years ago. But I want to make sure that we get that passed into law so we have a national standard in place for protecting voting rights and protecting the original intent of the 1965 Voting Rights Act.
Now, you mentioned that there was a time when Republicans and Democrats came together to support the voting rights. What changed?
I don't know. I think you'd probably have to ask some Republican senators, because they haven't been willing so far to support the John Lewis Voting Rights Act. And it's also an issue that we should debate more, that they should, if they don't support the legislation, they should come on the floor and tell us why. But I hope that in the next few years we can break down some of those partisan barriers and get it passed.
Now, one of the initiatives that you've been driving forward is the 5 Freedoms for America's Children. Can you tell us about those freedoms and why they're important?
It's critical, I think, that we have a national strategy for our commitment to children. We all say we're committed to children. Both parties say it. Both houses in Congress, Americans of all points of view say that we want to support our children. And yet at a national level, we don't have the kind of investment we need in our kids. We don't have the kind of commitment from the United States Congress that we need to support our children. So it's premised, it's borrowed directly from Franklin Roosevelt's 4 freedoms. In this case, I applied it to children and added one, and not in any particular order, but the freedom to be healthy is essential. That's why every child should have health care in the United States of America. There's no reason for that, no excuse for that. The freedom to learn, so that children can learn more now when they're very young and earn more later when they're in the workforce. We don't have a national commitment to that. I hope we can get to that. The freedom to be safe from harm, to protect children from those who would do harm to them, predators and others in our society, to protect kids and to prosecute those who do harm to kids. The freedom from hunger, to make sure that every child has enough to eat and has healthy, nutritious food. That's a major failing over many years, where we have not made a full commitment to make sure that no child goes hungry in America. And the freedom to have economic security is the fifth freedom, to make sure that every child has a foundation for economic security. That starts when the child is born. We should be creating, as my legislation does, the 401 Kids Act, to create, in essence, a 401k account for every child, that's seeded when they're born and then is built up over time, so that when that child becomes an adult at the age of 18, they have a foundation for savings that gives them, no matter who they are, no matter where they live, that every American child has an economic foundation starting out. So I think if we make that kind of commitment to our kids, and instead of rigging the tax code for big companies and very wealthy Americans, and use the power of the tax code to invest in our kids, we're going to be doing the right thing for those children and their families, but we're also going to be doing so much to support our economic security. Even our national security is enhanced when we invest in kids. It's a great line from an organization you might have heard of: fight crime, invest in kids. It's not just a name of a group, it's not just a soundbite, but it's true. If you invest in kids, you're going to have less crime, and we haven't learned that lesson yet as a nation.
Now, you mentioned making changes to the tax code. In 2017, the tax cut was implemented that reduced the corporate tax rate from 35% to 21%. What did you think of that?
I voted against it. I voted against the whole bill because I think it was a gross, obscene giveaway to the wealthiest in our country at a time when the middle class needed a lot more help than they got, and lower income families needed help as well. We should have used, and I say Republicans rammed that through with just Republican votes. So not a single Democrat in the Senate voted for that bill. It was all Republicans. They rammed it through. It gave permanent tax relief to major corporations. As you said, it reduced their tax rate all the way down from 35% down to 21%. And of course, so many big companies, even after that bill was passed into law, were not paying their fair share in taxes. They weren't paying anywhere near 21%. And anywhere near 35%, they were paying in some cases 7 or 8%. It also gave away the store, in my judgment, to very wealthy Americans. It did not take that child tax credit and enhance it as we did 4 years later in the American Rescue Plan, where we took the child tax credit and enhanced it to the point where about 85% of the children in Pennsylvania were benefiting. Their families were getting a direct infusion of support into their bank accounts so they could buy food for their children, which was the number one utilization. But they could also use it for whatever expense they had, whether it was rent or other expenses in the life of that family. That when we go to change the tax code next time, that's what we should use it for. Now, we have an opportunity coming up. It's entirely possible that in the month of April we can pass in the Senate with, thankfully, bipartisan support, a much more robust child tax credit than we have in place now, because the generous version in 2021 expired. So pass a generous child tax credit for families raising children, if you call yourself pro-family, as so many politicians do. And then there's also a companion set of business credits, the research and development tax credit. If we can pass a tax bill that helps children and helps businesses at the same time, that's a good deal.
Now, in 2022, Russia invaded a democratic Ukraine. The United States has been supporting Ukraine's efforts to defend itself. What do you think of those policies to support Ukraine, and what do you think we need to do?
It's not only the right thing to do, I think it's essential for our security. And I hope that the House will finally vote at long last on the Ukraine security bill. This Ukraine bill, this is a bill that the Speaker of the House only needs to call a vote. I would hope he would support it, and I hope his party would, but If he puts that bill on the floor, I think it'll pass. And it's a bill to support Ukraine, to support Israel, to defeat Hamas. So help Ukraine defeat Putin, help Israel defeat Hamas, help the Taiwanese government to be prepared for what China could do to them. And in addition, there's an important fentanyl bill that's embedded into the Ukraine security bill. But Vladimir Putin has to be stopped. He's a murderous dictator, and if you don't stop him in Ukraine, he's going to be going to Poland or some other NATO country. And the moment he does that, we are committed as a nation under Article 5 to help any nation that's covered by NATO. We have a treaty obligation to help them. So we don't want America and Europe in a much wider war because we have not stopped Putin from in his murderous intent to take over Ukraine. The good news is if we help Ukraine, they can prevail over Vladimir Putin. We've got to do it.
Talk a little bit more about NATO. How important is NATO to America's national security?
It's been a guarantor of our security for so long, ever since the end of World War II when NATO was created. To have that security umbrella, not only for Europe, but for our country as well. And in fact, I think most of the historians would tell you the only time that Article 5 was invoked, meaning one country is attacked and all the other countries help that country, that the only time that was invoked was September the 11th, 2001, when we were invaded by terrorists, and NATO countries came to our aid because we were invaded by terrorists. But it's been probably the most successful security guarantee the world has ever seen, and we cannot allow some Republican politicians to undermine NATO, to send a message that America will not support our allies or support NATO countries by talking about reducing funding or not adhering to Article 5 guarantees.
Well, let's talk a little bit about your campaign. How are you campaigning? Are you traveling around the state? Or are you holding rallies?
Yeah, it's a combination of doing the job every day, which I have to do as a United States Senator, but also trying to schedule as many events as we can where you're talking to supporters or you're meeting voters, engaging with voters. Campaigns are long and complicated, but you have to, as time goes by, we'll be trying to be able to spend more time talking to voters and really trying to get a sense from voters what they're going to be voting on. You hear a lot on the campaign trail about lowering costs. That's why I mentioned capping insulin, the child tax credit, taking on big companies that are jacking up the cost of food and household items, and taking that on and proposing legislation to give the Federal Trade Commission the power to conduct price gouging investigations, and going after those companies that are really abusing their power to jack up prices way beyond the affordability of most families. So I hear a lot about costs on the campaign trail. I hear a lot about issues that are front and center in the lives of families. And when you're in a big state with 67 counties, there's a lot of territory to cover.
When you're talking with voters, you mentioned a few of the things that they're telling you.
Right.
Are there some key themes that come out in their concerns as you go to different parts of the state?
We hear a lot about, as I said, about lowering costs, and we hear from families all the time. Seniors, that's why the insulin cap helps. Seniors are waiting now for the implementation of the bill we passed in 2022 to have Medicare negotiate for lower prescription drug prices. That's coming soon. But also you hear, we hear a good bit about border security. That's why when we had that moment where we could pass bipartisan border security legislation, the toughest and most rigorous kind of border security bill we've seen in the Senate in probably 15 years, if not 25 years. We had that opportunity to pass it. The Republicans in the Senate, many of whom were supporting it, walked away from it and said they wouldn't support it, including my opponent in this campaign, David McCormick. He said he would not support the bipartisan border security bill, and that was a terrible, terrible lost opportunity. I think we're going to give some Republicans more opportunities to vote on that. We should have more votes on that bill just to make sure that they have a chance to vote on that bipartisan bill again, instead of just voting against it once and walking away from it. So I hope when we get to passing the bipartisan border security bill, I hope we'll get robust Republican support for efforts to detect fentanyl at the border with these screening machines to find fentanyl in passenger cars and in vehicles of all kinds, hiring thousands more Border Patrol agents, hiring more agents at ICE, Immigration and Customs Enforcement, to be able to do everything we can to reduce the flow across our border of people coming across the border, thousands a day, and also to attack the fentanyl crisis at its core by stopping China from producing precursor chemicals, getting them through Mexico, and then using the best technology available to stop fentanyl at the border. So I'm hearing a lot about that issue, and I think a lot of people are frustrated that Republicans in the Senate and Republican candidates like my opponent don't support the bipartisan and very tough border security bill.
We have about a minute left. Use that time to tell voters why they should vote for you.
Well, I think they should vote for me because I've delivered for this state, delivered for families over and over again in communities by investing in not just better infrastructure at home, whether it's roads or bridges or high-speed internet for rural areas so our kids can learn in school, but also delivering on the promise of helping families, capping the cost of insulin, helping families that have had a loved one serve near toxic burn pits. That's why I supported strongly the PACT Act to get that done, to provide quality health care to those veterans. And I want to make sure that in this campaign people know the difference between what I've been doing as a public official and what my opponent was doing in the years when I've been serving in the Senate, investing in China as he did as a hedge fund manager, and investing in and investing for China when I was trying to stop China from stealing our technology and preventing China from ripping people off. So we're going to continue to have that fight, the fight on greedflation. I'm on one side, my opponent's on the other. He doesn't think we should take on big companies when they jack up food prices. I do. So we'll have a big debate ahead of us.
We've been speaking with Bob Casey, the Democratic candidate running for re-election to the U.S. Senate. Senator, thank you for joining us.
Thanks, Phil.